One of the things that I try to do in our confirmation classes is train them on speaking in public. As you know, at the end of confirmation class, they offer testimonies to the congregation. And I don't want that to be their first time up here talking in front of you. So we do a little bit of training with the confirmands as the year goes on, speaking, reading scriptures and so on. And thank you to all who are doing that. So this Tuesday coming up is Valentine's Day. There's still plenty of time to go out and buy your sweetie a gift. I'm sure that Walmart and Old World Creations will be full of men in the next day or two, purchasing their last-minute tokens of esteem for their loved ones because the women have already purchased them, right? St. Valentine, who we celebrate this day because of, was an actual person. St. Valentine was a bishop in Rome who was martyred in 263 A.D. In fact, Valentine was a popular name in the 2nd and 3rd centuries, and there were several early Christian martyrs named Valentine, or the formal Latin version, Valentinus. This holiday, although it's no longer an official holiday or saint day in the Catholic Church, was created not by Hallmark, but by society and cultural legends that have sprung up around these historical figures and the common thread of love that is woven throughout their stories. There's one legend that says that Valentinus was a rogue Christian bishop who officiated marriages that the state deemed illegal. The legend says that Roman Emperor Claudius II issued a decree that Roman soldiers should not be allowed to marry so that they could concentrate instead on being a soldier and have no distractions. Valentinus, believing in love over all and abhorring the idea that dedication to war triumphed over love, defied the emperor's decree and began officiating illegal marriages for these soldiers. Love wins in the end. And this legend goes on to say that Valentinus was martyred because of his dedication to the principle that love wins and that these soldiers should be allowed to share God's gift of love. However, historians will tell you that there is no record of this or of Claudius II making such a decree. So the story may just be a legend. Yet another Valentine's Day legend says that St. Valentinus was arrested and imprisoned simply for being a Christian because you know at that time it was illegal to be a Christian. Emperor Claudius was impressed with his dedication and his character and brought him to the royal palace to try and convert him to paganism, to the worship of Roman gods, and denouncing Jesus. Valentinus, however, rebuked the emperor, kept the faith, and tried to convert Claudius to Christianity instead, arguing that Jesus' love will triumph over all, meaning the love of Christ is greater than the lust and pride and arrogance advocated by the pagan gods of Rome. St. Valentine was thrown back in jail and condemned to die the next day. But his jailer was so impressed by Valentine's testimony that he converted to Christianity and expressed his faith in Jesus. He asked Valentine if his daughter Julia, who had been blind since birth, might be healed. The jailer brought Julia to Valentine in jail, and Valentine performed his first and last miracle, restoring the sight of little Julia. Before being let off to die the next morning, St. Valentine wrote a letter to Julia, signing it, "With love, your Valentine." Now, historians will also tell you that that story is not true either. And the claim that this would have been the first Valentine's Day card, predating Hallmark by a good 1,700 years. But while neither of these stories can be proven historically, and in fact, some historians will even disprove them historically, that doesn't mean that they're not true. For there is an element of truth and wisdom contained in these stories, and even if none of these historical men named Valentine, these saints who were martyred for the Christian cause, ever experienced these particular historical events, these stories certainly encapsulate the emotional impact of their lives, their ministries, and certainly their passions. Historically, we believe that St. Valentine had the love of God burning in his heart. And that is where the origin of Valentine's Day takes place. So Valentine's Day is not just a Hallmark holiday. It was celebrated much earlier than Hallmark. In fact, the elevation of love on this particular day in February, in the middle of a cold winter, may even predate the decision to celebrate Christmas on a date in December. This lone day in February was a simple day to celebrate the martyrdom of a Christian saint, a simple man for whom Jesus' message was all about love. What a great occasion to eat chocolate. From what we know about Saint Valentinus, living in the early 200s, to him the gospel in just one word is love. The essence of Jesus, the essence of the Gospels, the essence of the wisdom that Jesus shared with us is simply that, love. Look at all the ways Jesus tells us to love. All throughout his ministry, he tells us to have love for one another, and he even tells us the last evening of his life that this is the greatest commandment of all, to love one another, even as I have loved you. Love, 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 love. The gospel, in one word, is love. That's a song. I'm going to invite you all to sing it with me. Love, 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 love. The gospel, in one word, is love. Christians, this is your call. What's the last line? For God is love. That's right. So, if I can remember it, see if you can join with me, okay? Shelby, help. Love, 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 love. The gospel in one word is love. Christians, this is your call, 'cause God is love. Very good. We don't have to do it again. That's a camp song. Some of you may have sung that with me at camp over the years. But we talk about love, right? We talk about hearts and flowers. And there's a danger here of falling into a simplicity. To say Jesus is love and that's all that matters, end of story. But there's more to it than that. There's a depth to it that doesn't get encapsulated by that simple song that we sing at camp. We can say that we have love for everyone, but the reality is that most of the time it's just lip service. We don't love others first as Jesus loved us. We love others as we think that we would like them to love us back, and then we expect the reciprocity to begin. We love others conditionally, when it's easy, when it's safe, when it doesn't stretch the boundaries of our imagination or convenience. We love others at a distance. We love others when we get around to it. We love others when we can do it by giving them a donation, but not actually getting our hands dirty. This is where the wisdom of our scriptures comes in today. The wisdom of both the book of Matthew and Deuteronomy that TJ read to us tells us that it's not enough to simply have love. We must have God's love written on our hearts, deep in our hearts. The Old Testament lesson, the first one TJ read from Deuteronomy, is traditionally spoken by Moses just before he dies and has the reins of leadership handed over to Joshua. This is Moses' last address to the Jewish people, and he's telling them what matters most of all as they are about to enter the promised land, to have the love of God written on their hearts. Now think about the context. The Israelites have followed Moses out of slavery in Egypt and through the wilderness for 40 years. They're now arriving in the promised land. During these 40 years, they experienced a loss of faith. They experienced doubt, despair, hunger, and thirst. They experienced aimlessness as they wandered with no real end in sight. Sore feet, sore backs, and sore tempers. But during all of this trial and tribulation, they also experienced God's grace in incredible ways. They received salvation from slavery in Egypt at the hand of God's mighty deliverance. They received manna in the wilderness and water from the rock at the hand of God's mighty provision. They received a pillar of fire at night guiding them along the journey, God's mighty presence. And they received God's commandments given to Moses on Mount Sinai by God's mighty desire to be in relationship. Boy, these past 40 years have been rough. They have been through a lot, But during that time of trial and rejoicing, God's promises, God's presence, and God's provision was written on their hearts. Now Moses, knowing that death is near, implores them not to forget this. As they entered the land that is their blessing, they are to remember what is written on their hearts. So Moses, as he implores the Israelites to keep the commandments as they enter the promised land, is not just talking about following the rules. He's talking about keeping God in their hearts. He's talking about choosing God, choosing to live by choosing God, and realizing that God's promises are always with them, no matter what they go through in life. Jesus, by contrast, is speaking at the beginning of his ministry. He's not about to die, as Moses was in our Old Testament reading. Jesus is about to begin. This sermon that he gives, this section that we read today, just like the verses we've heard the past several Sundays, come from the Sermon on the Mountain, the Sermon on the Mount as it's called, Jesus' inaugural address. This is right after Jesus was baptized, tempted by the devil in the wilderness, and then begins his ministry. He's filled with the Holy Spirit and begins preaching all around Galilee. He's led to this high mountain where he gives this most famous sermon. He starts by telling us that blessed are the meek and the peacemakers and so on. We talked about that 2 weeks ago in worship. He then tells us that we are the salt of the earth, the light of the world. And I believe Fred Brandenburg talked about that with you all last week while I was experiencing salt water in Mexico. Now today, continuing that same inaugural sermon, Jesus tells us that he has not come to abolish the law and the commandments and that Moses received, or the wisdom of the prophets and so on who followed Moses, but rather he comes in that same line of thought that God's love must not just be something that we believe in and act cautiously towards, but also something that is written on our hearts, a mandate and a driving force in our very lives. God's love must be as central to our everyday living as the blood that courses through our hearts, permeating every fiber of our actions, our lives, and our existence like those superheroes that Jackson brought for us. It must not be something that we do. It must be who we are. He then goes on to talk about those for whom God's love is not written on their hearts and how they will be excluded from the people of God, not by God's wrath, not by God's judgment, but by their own choices, their own actions, their own decisions to prioritize separation and division over love. If anger, judgment, insult, or injury is more prominent than God's love in your heart, then exclusion and banishment are simply consequences of our own sinful actions. Jesus implores us to choose God, not death. There was once an old monastery that was tucked away in the midst of a beautiful, peaceful forest. The architecture of this monastery was exquisite and the scenery picturesque. But travelers were drawn to this monastery not because of how beautiful it was, but because of the overwhelming sense of love that exuded from the monks who lived there. They lived in harmony, enjoying each other and everyone they met, and they had God's love written on their hearts. They were at peace with the world. The peaceful healing of the monastery was a balm to the soul of many world-weary travelers. But that spirit changed over time, as things are wont to do. The monks began to take more pride in who they were and in their individual achievements and showed less respect for one another. They developed a competitive nature, trying to one-up each other, compromising their inherent spiritual nature. They grew petty, jealous, and prideful, with little room for God's love in their hearts. Eventually, the serenity of the monastery was compromised, and travelers stopped journeying there. No healing of the soul was to happen in that monastery anymore. Well, the leader of the monastery, the abbot, he was very distressed, and he turned to his friend Jeremiah, a local Jewish rabbi. He asked Jeremiah what to do. He was beside himself and open to any suggestion on how to change things. Jeremiah told him, "It's funny that you should come to me. I had a vision the other night about your monastery. In my vision, it was revealed to me that the Messiah has come, and he is among the company of the monks in your monastery." Well, the abbot was beside himself. Jesus has come, and he's one of the monks in the monastery? He ran back to the monastery and shared the news with his fellow monks. They were flabbergasted. Which one of us could it be? From that day on, the mood at the monastery changed. Monks began talking to one another again, compassionately, not wanting to offend the other in case that one was the Messiah. They stopped being jealous of one another, taking pride in each other's accomplishments because that other might be the Messiah. They began seeking healing from one another, asking and giving forgiveness to one another, thinking that in doing so, they may be communing with the Messiah. And in fact, they were. One traveler, and then another, found their way back to the monastery as word of their returned sense of serenity grew. Pilgrim after pilgrim was renewed by the spirit of the monks at the monastery who found Jesus once more in their midst. Fearing that the other was Jesus caused the monks to put aside their pride and prejudice and elevate the other. Realizing that the other was the Messiah helped these monks to let God's love truly be written on their hearts. The Messiah is not coming. The Messiah is here. The Messiah is the person sitting next to you this morning, or the obnoxious coworker you must endure tomorrow morning. The stranger you encounter in Walmart, the outcast, the downtrodden, the snotty teenager with acne, or the crabby elderly person with bed sores. The person we meet on the street, and the person we never meet face to face, but who scares us anyway. Jesus calls us to have God's love written on our hearts and to love one another, whoever we are and wherever we are in life's journey. As much as Jesus first loved us, enough to lay our lives down for all of God's children suffering and in need. Choose God and let God's love not just be something that we believe. Let it be truly written on our hearts. Amen.